Welcome back. In this demo, we're going to be looking at the light envelope for late afternoon. Let's think about the aspects of light and in particular about the angle and how it's going to affect the color, both in hue, temperature, and intensity. So the angle of the light is very, very low, which is making warm light. And the sun is behind us. So with that direction, our subject is being flooded with that warm, low-angled light. The values are predominantly light above middle gray. The strength of the light is really high. So it's very strong, very direct light. We have very strong contrast in both hue and value. So think about having strong contrast in color as you work on your painting. Now the overall color of the light is outdoor light, which starts at white but then gets affected by the other three aspects of color. So while we may have started with a white light because it's outdoor light, the color of the light is affected by the angle, which makes it warm, the direction, which makes it predominantly light, and the strength, which makes it very high contrast. So let's dive into putting those into our painting. So just a quick review of our palette that we mixed in the last lesson. So we have along the bottom a range of purpley greens moving to warm greens. So we're going from the darker, slightly cooler greens to lighter, slightly warmer greens. We have the Italian Terre Verte mixed with purple on the left, all the way up to the Italian Terre Verte, Italian Green Earth, mixed with some of the Montserrat Orange and Indian Yellow. Above that, we have a whole range of lighter, warmer purples into Montserrat Oranges. Above that, we have our lavenders that we're going to use in the fields and colors for the clouds and the sky above that. So let's dive right on in. So the first thing we're going to do with our painting is to begin by blocking in the no-tan. Remember that we're using the dark purpley green, that's the mixture of the Egyptian violet and Italian Terre Verte. So very quickly, without overthinking that pattern of trees in the far distance, we're just going to block that in with your largest knife or largest brush. Remember not to get too caught up in details at this point. You just want to block in where those darkest values go. And remember to apply that dark paint very thinly. It does not need to be a thick layer. So we're going to block in as well for the shadows, and there's a strong shadow that runs almost right underneath that tree line, and then another one down towards the bottom right hand corner where the furrows in the field are in shadow, and you're able to see those more clearly because of them being closer to you. That strong raking light of late afternoon makes these deep shadows within the furrows of the field. If you get any paint where you don't want it to go, by all means you can take, at this point, since the only thing on there is your no-tan, you can take a paper towel and wipe that off. Next, we're going to block in that sky really quickly, starting with our ultramarine and white at the top. So we're getting that blue, darker blue established very quickly at the beginning. And then we're going to move to the lighter values as we go down. Now at that time of year, the blue that's in the sky, especially here in the southeast, it's going to be different in different climates and different geographies, but the blue that's in the sky during the fall season tends to be more of an ultramarine blue a warmer blue and less of a cool blue. So it does not have the greenish tint to it at the top that you would have in the summer, and it's a much warmer blue. So I'm going to bring that ultramarine blue way down beyond where it's going to be in the end in the final painting, because I'm going to blend the lighter color back up into it. So the join line, or the area where those two colors meet, is going to be a middle value that's established by the mixing of the colors. So here you see that lighter blue going in, and at that point on the horizon, that blue is beginning to cool off. It's beginning to green up. So that light blue is a mixture of ultramarine and phthalo, and actually even has a tiny, tiny little bit of yellow in it. Not much, but just a tiny. So it makes it a little greener. And then you can blend it up into the darker blue to create that secondary blue value. Keep your mark making really loose at this point. You can always tighten it up later, but you want to work fairly quickly and fairly loosely at the blocking end stage. Don't worry about eradicating all brush marks at this point. So you see me moving paint off of the edge. If paint runs over the edge and you don't want to get it on your hands, just scrape it off with the knife. Always remember to wipe that palette knife off on the paper towel as you go so that you don't end up with a hot mess. And putting some more of that light blue back in towards the bottom where it's not going to be as mixed with the ultramarine blue. And there's a band of clouds along the horizon line that we're going to put in a minute that is right up against the tree line. That band of clouds, because of the time of day and the angle of the light, is very, very light, but it's also very, very purpley blue. So after we get that lighter yellowy white color on the right hand side, we're going to block in that very purplish blue color that is going to represent the cloud along the horizon line. As it meets that area of strong light, which is the yellow and white mixture, it's going to blend. So as we've done with the darker colors, keep that light really thin so that when you blend, you don't have too much paint on the panel or the canvas. And again, because that is simply the lighter value of the sky at the horizon, that's going to be a softer edge. Always think about edge. So here we're going with our cloud along the horizon. And bringing it slowly over where it's going to meet that lighter value of the sky. It will naturally blend as you apply the paint because of one mark going into the other. And again, just as with the rest of the sky, don't worry about blending and eradicating marks too much at this point because you want to block in the rest of the painting first. So bringing some more of the lighter blue down into that the cloud color, so that we're bopping back and forth a little bit between the colors of the sky. You don't want it to be a solid mass. And then bringing some of the light back over into the cloud. Remember that because it's afternoon, those clouds are going to be catching late afternoon light. They're not going to be white. They're going to be affected by the low-angled warm light, and there'll be more of a yellow-orange where they're catching that light. So here we're laying in a little bit more of the light, working on developing the lighter part of the sky right where it meets that dark cloud, and then blending back up some. Taking very little of the paint and just gradually adding in elements that imply clouds along the horizon. Now we're blocking in some of those more lavender shadow areas in the fields, and going to move into establishing the main colors and values and temperatures of the land below now that we have the sky blocked in. That central section of really light area in the field is going to be blocked in with the Montserrat orange and Indian yellow mixture. More pink than yellow to start with, and then we'll add the yellow on top to imply more value variation and where the light is hitting the top of the furrows. And you can let that color blend a little bit with the shadow no tan and with the shadow in the foreground as you're working it in, so that you have a transition from where the area is very light to the area where there's a little bit more shadow on that right hand side. So very quickly we have paint over most of the picture plane. Remember that those furrows are not hard-edged geometric lines, and that you want to break that line up a little bit so it doesn't read as just a triangular wedge stuck onto the landscape. So make the line where it meets the other shape, that dark shape at the bottom of the painting, a little bit irregular. Break it up some. So once you have that base color and value in for the main part of the landscape, you can begin to break it up into a range of different values. Remembering that the lightest part, the overall predominantly lighter part, is going to be on the left-hand side. So I can use some of the lighter lavender color to begin to imply some of the furrows that run from the left to the right. And remember that they go at an angle so that you're going to have a certain amount of linear perspective kicking in there. The color that is going in on the trees that are being hit by light is the Italian Terra Verde mixed with Italian green earth. So it's a warm green, middle to middle dark value, and it goes directly on top of the darker purple no tan color. So the tree, that base middle value is darker on the left-hand side than, darker on the right-hand side than it is on the left, because that right-hand side is slightly angled, and so it does not catch the light in the same way. So the trees to the right that are not receiving that full frontal sun are being blocked in with Italian terra verde with a tiny, tiny little bit of dioxazine purple, the Egyptian violet in it. So that is going to make a turn in the plane of the back tree line by having different values and different temperatures on that tree line. Now we're using the green ochre mixed with our Indian yellow Montserrat orange combination, which becomes a very, very warm green. It has a little terra verde in there. That becomes the highlight color, one of the highlight colors on those left-hand trees. If you overshoot the mark with the larger brush or knife, you can always go back in and scrape out. And remember that where your tree line hits the sky, you can do that dance back and forth with the small knife to begin to break that edge up so that it is not too hard and there are a few little sky holes poking through the tree line. So now that we have those trees established, we're going to break up that front mass of the field a little bit more, establishing more of those furrows, as well as the shadow on the right-hand side. Using some of the lighter gray, that warm purpley gray. That same color is going to come down into that foreground shadow. So where it is a shadow in the lighter part of the field, it will become a highlight in the darker part. So let's just think about that again. What becomes somewhat of a shadow, middle value shadow in the lighter part of the field, will become a highlight in the darker area. Thinking about the contrast in values. You're not going to have that super light highlight color that's in the top part of the field in the darker part. So the values need to go down to imply shadow. They need to go down and they need to dull out just a little bit. So here you can see some of those furrows beginning to develop. So keep in mind with linear perspective that those lines, now I'm using that more intense, darker lavender, those lines are going to be at a lower angle on the left-hand side than on the right because they're moving up on that right-hand side because of linear perspective. So pay attention to which side is tilted up. And it will become more parallel as it gets closer to the horizon line. So we have a really strong contrast there between the warm, light color of the field and the cooler shadows of the furrows. You can work back and forth between those hues right now to develop that to the level of representation that you want in your painting. So here I'm mixing a color that is in between the lighter and the duller highlight area of the field so that I can get something that's a little bit in between. So at this stage, it's a tweaking stage, going back and forth to adjust those values to imply the changes in the shadows and the highlights of the field. So if things are looking a little too light in that shadow, you can go back in and darken it up. I'm using some of that intense blue, blue-violet to darken up the shadow on the right-hand side so that it stands out just a little bit more. As it works out to the left, it will lighten up. So in that last stage of the painting, you need to spend as much time kind of making minor adjustments, very small adjustments, and looking and thinking as you do actually painting. So work more slowly as you get towards the final stages of the painting. So here we're working back in some highlights to make sure that those lighter areas feel like they're flooded with that late afternoon light. Breaking up that foreground just a little bit more so that the edges stand out a little bit more on the highlights. So here we have our final painting, and let's just review quickly how that light key plays out in light that's in the very late afternoon. So the angle of our light was very low because it is late afternoon, sun is beginning to go down. The direction of the light source is behind us, so we have very predominantly light values because of the light flooding across the landscape. And the light is extremely strong, so the strength of our light is very direct and very strong, so we have very strong contrast in value, hue, intensity, and temperature. So there we have it. Dive in and let's see how you do on your version of the same composition. Also feel free to work from a photograph of your own that has similar light aspects to it. Happy painting!